How's it going, guys? My name is Jason and this is Learn, Build, Repeat.
For those who don't know, I'm a software engineer by trade, amateur woodworker by night. I've always been interested in building things, whether it's writing new software or creating something from wood. It really all started back in high school where I took my first shop class and was introduced to a workshop. Today we're building a crosscut sled for my table saw. This is something I've been wanting to build for a while now, but honestly just haven't found the time. This is going to upgrade my table saw in 3 ways. 1, it's going to let me make repeatable and accurate crosscuts. 2, it will let me cut tapers. And 3, and honestly probably the biggest reason why I want to build this is because I'm hoping it will let me get rid of my miter saw station. It's really big, it sits in the corner, it takes up a ton of space. If I can reduce the size of it, perhaps down just to the saw itself, it'll save me a ton of space in my garage. And considering I only have a 2-car garage, I don't have that much space. Now I get this might be a little bit controversial. I get that the miter saw is definitely useful in breaking down long boards that would not easily fit on a table saw, but I usually found myself making a lot of smaller cuts that would be applicable for a crosscut sled, where a miter saw is a lot more difficult to set up. I think I'll still keep my miter saw, but I'm hoping that I can just put it on a stand and tuck it away in a corner for only when I use it for those longer boards. I kind of like to experiment with my shop layout and workflow, so I hope that this is actually what works out in the future, and at least I'm willing to try it.
All right, here's everything I'll be making the crosscut sled out of. This is a Baltic birch panel that's left over from my last project. It's 48 inches wide, 24 inches deep, which will be perfect to make the crosscut sled from it. I then have this, T-slot track that will sit on top of the fence on the back of the crosscut sled. I got some T-track to inlay into the crosscut sled. I've got a bunch of hold down clamps, and I bought this micro jig set for 0-play miter bars. They seem a little small, honestly, but I'm gonna be making a fairly small crosscut sled because I don't want it to be heavy. I've watched a lot of YouTubers make them, and I noticed that they can be pretty heavy and pretty big, and I feel like I don't want that. Like, I feel like I just want something easy to pull out and use, so I'll be making it without the front face. I'm gonna make the crosscut sled 36 inches wide, which is exactly the same width as this, which I feel like is a good length. And for the depth of it, I'll be making it about 12 inches. I think that'll be appropriate depth because I don't really cut anything that's a little bit longer than that anyway, and if I do, I'm usually using a track saw or my table saw. So let's get to it.
I wouldn't say I'm a particularly skilled woodworker, definitely more on the amateur side, but I can throw a few things together. Here I am making the back fence for the crosscut sled. It's simply 2 panels that I'm going to glue and clamp together. Later on I'll cut a small dado through the middle of it so I can slide in the T-track. For this crosscut sled, I am not going to be making a front fence because I want to keep the weight down and because I can cut water boards with it. I'm also going to make a small handle that I'll glue to the back side of the fence. This will prevent the blade from completely coming through the crosscut sled and protecting my fingers in the process. It'll be very simply constructed just from laminating 2 pieces of plywood together. The next step is to cut the miter bars to the crosscut sled. These are aluminum, so I know they can be cut on a woodworking saw, but I was still very apprehensive. I cut 3 of them, but I only ended up using 2 of them. I might use a 3rd one in the future if I figure out that I need a 3rd one for like a taper or something, but for now, these will be fine. I used these T-track bars in conjunction with 2 scrap pieces of plywood that would simulate the thickness of my fence to find the final width of the crosscut sled base. I made a mark with my pencil, made a line with my speed square, and then ran it through the table saw to get to the correct width. It was now time for the first tricky part of this build, and that was attaching the miter bars to the base. The first thing I did was put these 1/8 spacers in the miter slots on the table saw. This would raise the miter bars up just a little bit such that when I put the base on, they would actually contact each other. The miter bars that came in the micro jig kit have the ability to expand a little bit, so I expanded them so they were snug and then tighten them with a hex key. The next step was to take some double-sided tape and apply it to the miter bars. This would allow me to easily and quickly attach the miter bars to the base so that I could bolt them together later. I then used a scrap piece of plywood to align the miter bars to the back of the table saw, and then grabbed my base and very carefully pressed it onto the miter bars while keeping it tight to the fence. I let it sit here for a few moments to make sure that the glue had time to adhere. The next step was to securely attach the miter bars to the base. I first used a very small drill bit to drill pilot holes from the back side of the base where the miter bars were. This allowed me to figure out on the front side exactly where the bolt should go. I then used a larger drill bit so I could countersink holes for the bolt heads. After this was done, I simply ran the bolts through the holes and attached the miter bars using them. I actually did blow through with a drill bit one of the holes in the miter bar and ruin the threads, but luckily I did have a nut that would perfectly fit the bolts in my shop already, so I just widened the back of the miter bar and used that bolt to firmly attach it. I then absolutely had to give it a quick test, so I put it on my table saw and pushed it back and forth a few times. It was actually a little too tight, so I ended up sanding the sides of the miter bars just a little bit, and then it started to slide nice and smoothly, as you can see here. And next I had to attach a T-track. To do this, I bought an attachment for my DeWalt hand router that would attach it to my Festool tracksaw track. It actually was a little bit difficult to line up because it's not clear where the router bit would actually start biting into the wood. I mean, there's this little arrow, but it wasn't exactly right. But after a few trial and errors, I eventually figured it out and was able to actually make the slots.
Doesn't fit.
But after another pass with the router, it fit perfectly. And then before screwing in the T-track, I used my Dyson. Yes, my Dyson. It's mine, not my wife's, so it's okay. To clean up the sawdust in my shop and then screwed in the T-track. Next, it was time to move on to finishing the fence. I put a small chamfer on one side of the fence just so I could prevent any sawdust from causing an unsquare cut when it was finally assembled. And then I cut a small dado in the top of the fence. There's a kind of like a groove that sits down from the T-track that I bought that I needed to inlay into the fence itself. So I ran the fence a few times through the table saw to create this dado. Then all it took was a few screws to attach it to the fence and it was done. Okay, now we're at the most critical part of this build. I need to make sure that this fence is dead straight with where the saw cuts. And the way you kind of do this is using screws, no glue on this one. We're gonna screw up one here, one over here, and then we're gonna do a test cut, and we're gonna see if that test cut is exactly parallel. If it's not, what I'll do is I'll remove one of the screws and then slightly adjust the fence until it's perfectly parallel. So then I attach 2 screws on either side, doing my best to keep the fence perpendicular to the blade. And then I use my machinist square to set up a test cut. I cut it on both sides here, and then went to check to see if it was parallel on both ends. All right, let's see if it's square. So it's 145, 1 inches and 45, and 133. So it's not even close. So after removing one of the screws in the fence, I readjusted it. I know that there are more sophisticated methods for making the square, but what I did seemed very simple to me. So I took my machinist square, which is dead accurate, and lined it up against the back fence and the blade till it was perfectly square. And then I just screwed in the fence again, using a different hole for the screw this time. And then I did another test cut. Okay, after fiddling with it for a while and using the machinist square, the side's at 1.14. 1.14, okay. Wow, I know there's like really complicated ways to make these things square, but it looks like it actually works. Yeah, it's perfect. So after adding the handle/blade guard to the back of the fence and adding a ruler on top of it, here it is, completely done. If you guys like watching someone in the garage build stuff, please don't forget to leave a like and hit that subscribe button. In the future, I'll be using this to build lots of cool furniture. I'll see you then.